reviewer, Andrea, Roberta, Francesca, everyone that has helped me to reach this point. Today I'm presenting a paper entitled A World of Pedagogic Principles, the idea of principles in academic pedagogy. The first thing that I wanted to say is that principles are by definition abstract notions, and as such their precise identification may be an onerous task, especially when it comes to them acting as indicators of the inherent pedagogic value of proposed or applied educational models and approaches. Nevertheless, pedagogic principles can be crystallized and agreed upon and can act as objective starting points in one's pedagogic endeavors. Principles, together with values, constitute what I consider the apex of human existence and endeavors. Principles define our laws, our constitutions, our lives, our educational systems, our very existence. One might not agree with the principles of another person, yet it is the case that principles define human existence. Principles, of course, are not practices. For the purposes of academic education, principles could be perceived as starting points, one's initial compass in the world of pedagogic ontology. I would like to make a few explanatory notes before we commence with the main part of the paper. I think those would be important caveats, important analytical caveats for us to understand my paper slightly better. The first thing that I would like to say is that one should not confuse principles of academic pedagogy with outcomes. It would therefore be quite important for one to appreciate that pedagogy, indeed academic pedagogy, should not reduce themselves into metrics and outcomes. In any case, the search for and articulation of pedagogic principles is an important pursuit toward our philosophies and practices of education. One is, of course, well aware of the dangers surrounding modern liberal academic education, the most obvious one being a neoliberal, McDonaldized, commercialized type of education and pedagogy where everything, or almost everything, has to be sacrificed in the altar of profit-making and economic goals which are disconnected from academia. My paper's approach otherwise hovers between the worlds of subjectivity and objectivity. I would like to emphasize the point that the identification of principles is a daunting task in itself, especially considering the magnificent wealth academia comes with in terms of the diversity and differentiation between educational, pedagogical approaches, directions, purposes, disciplinary and institutional contexts, and more. In this respect, the ultimate goal of my paper would be to instigate discussion around the nature and value of pedagogic principles and the fact that such principles are necessarily malleable and never monolithic in a universe of educational priorities and perspectives. The 8 principles that I would like to put forward in my paper today would be academic freedom, adaptability and inclusivity, the spirit of academic community, constructive observation, communication and interactivity, creativity, academic citizenship, and the ethos that comes with academic citizenship and interdisciplinarity. When it comes to academic freedom, there's not much to be told here. Most of us know what academic freedom should be more than less. This is a principle second to none in academic life. This is the principle we have called academic freedom. All pedagogy, all research, all operations in academia ultimately succumb to the principle of academic freedom. All we do, all we will ever do in academia would ultimately have to be done in freedom. Academic freedom is in the essence of the matter all that academia stands for. Remove the spirit of academic freedom from higher education institutions, and all that would be left would be centers of indoctrination. The second principle that I would like to put forward for today's paper would be the spirit of academic community. It is quite important that instructors and students pedagogically flourish in an environment wherein the bonds between them are not merely functional or formal. It is the case that in such an environment, both pedagogues and students promote such a spirit of academic community. For both of them, work towards the same goal, knowledge. Such a principle would be about a continuous dialogue between academic instructors and students, between students themselves, between instructors themselves, between universities, and so on and so forth. I wanted to talk about adaptability and inclusivity as the third principle of my paper. I would like to mention that there's no such thing as perfect pedagogy. The closest one would ever get to good pedagogy is a type of pedagogy that is flexible and adapts. What was close to perfect yesterday might not be anywhere near perfect tomorrow. There is, however, pedagogy that comes close to excellence. Such is the pedagogy that adapts its modes of instruction, its curricula, its operations, its teaching and learning strategies to the needs of students, economies, and society. Such is the pedagogy that is inclusive and caters for the needs of as many different types of learners as possible, a pedagogy that deploys as many pedagogic tools as possible. Here we are talking about a type of pedagogy that is outward-looking, exciting, inspiring, and flexible. This is about the pedagogy that experiments. It is about getting it wrong to get it right. The magnificence of relatively flexible models of pedagogy lies exactly in the fact that we are not talking about static or educational conservative models of education. Communication and interactivity is the next principle that I would like to briefly mention here. Pedagogy is really about communication. Excellent pedagogy is about excellent communication, a two-way type of communication initially, a multi-directional type of communication upon maturing of the pedagogic model. An excellent pedagogue is an excellent communicator. An excellent pedagogue is a pedagogue who interacts with student body. A pedagogue of the kind would not only interact with student body, but would also allow student body full intellectual autonomy in interacting with him as well as with the student body itself. One could, of course, juxtapose that pedagogue with that instructor who does not trigger the academic curiosity of students. However, pedagogy is not a job. I think pedagogy is a function, a sort of a secret map that must be offered and revealed in good time and in the right way to student body. With that, I would like to move on to constructive observation. Pedagogy strives to self-perfect through constructive observation. There is no such thing, as we mentioned, as a single approach to pedagogy, nor should there be. There would not be such a thing as perfect pedagogy either. Nevertheless, there should be such a thing as an evolving type of academic pedagogy. And it is the case that each pedagogue comes with their own unique characteristics in their pedagogic operations. However, one's pedagogic uniqueness does not mean that one's pedagogy ought not to be the subject matter of constructive observation. It would therefore not be about one's own reflection of their pedagogy, at least not exclusively, as this would create a very subjective model of education. It would predominantly be about constructive observation, in addition, of course, to certain reflection. Interdisciplinarity, this would be a principle that I would like to put forward also. Whilst in so many of the things we do in academic pedagogy, we create specialized spirits, it would be important for our graduates to have also developed a more wide-ranging type of education. This type of education should include at the very least a certain few subjects beyond their disciplines subjects. And the old question as to creating homines universales over homines speciales becomes relevant here. In any case, it would be important for our graduates who would have specialized in a given discipline to have minimal awareness, minimal cognition and familiarization with certain subjects beyond those within their discipline. Creativity is something we stand for in academia. To create inquiring, critical, independent, free minds is one of the main goals of academia. Pedagogy then is not just about giving ready-made food, intellectual food to students. It's not about that. Pedagogy is not about intellectual spoon feeding. It is about triggering thinking processes, inspiring, streamlining, and enabling. To excite, of course, the academic curiosity of students is a sine qua non of academic pedagogy. There will always be more to be discovered. There will always be more to be revealed. This is a fundamental principle in our operations, a key indicator. Such an indicator will therefore have to be whether or not our students have been offered that continuous opportunity to learn more, to go beyond in their learning, to let their creativity develop as much as possible. Last but not least, the principle that I would like to talk about would be about academic citizenship. The aim should be to create academic citizens of world-class ethos. One should aim to produce not just apt and informed critical creatures in the academic environment. One must strive to produce academic citizens of the highest ethical standards, of world-class ethos, academic citizens who would be cosmopolitan creatures, amongst other things. One produces academic citizens with the idea in mind that they will ultimately be the persons responsible for the well-being of future societies. Excellence is then about virtue, and virtue is about knowledge. Thus, it is not just about the production of graduates. It would never just be about our graduates filling jobs and positions that would be necessary for the economy. It is about producing academic citizens of a fine ethos, an ethos that will define the societies of the future. After all, their future is our future. I want to conclude my paper by stating that this is a paper about instigating a discussion. Today we will not have discovered what are the key principles of pedagogy in academia. It was just a proposition. So my paper was about proposing principles. So it was the purpose of this contribution to explore the idea of principles in the academic environment, such principles acting potentially as indicators of higher education pedagogy in the learning environment. The value of principles can be found in the fact that these tend to be objective indicators mostly, especially when compared to one's subjective, reflective pedagogic practices. However, reflection is not excluded from our analysis and would be a welcome occurrence in one's academic pedagogy. At other times, one's evaluation of pedagogic principles shows a more specifics-based approach, as opposed to the more course-based approach of my contribution today. Finally, I would like to state that all of our principles would be open to certain adaptation, them ultimately succumbing to the leading principle in academia, that of academic freedom. That concludes my paper. I would be happy to answer any questions, and thanks very much for your attention.
Any questions? May I put a question, Antonio?
Of course.
You concluded your paper by insisting on freedom, which was the crux of the paper. My question is, should this freedom be absolute? Would you allow, for example, neo-Nazist principles to be taught for the sake of academic freedom?
So, if I got that correctly, Joseph, I have interruption. So how does academic freedom link to the rest of the principles? Is that what you asked?
Yes. Yes, I'll put the question online.
Thank you very much. Please do so. That is a very interesting question, Joseph. And that would be a question that would have to go as far as the limits of academic freedom. Where does academic freedom end, as it were? I personally am of the view that academic freedom is the ultimate principle in what we do. It is not a principle that actually is an absolute one in itself. So I think we need to make a distinction here. Is academic freedom an absolute principle or a leading principle? I would favor the idea that this is a leading principle. This is the leading principle in what we do. You have also mentioned whether we should go as far as, teaching theories of Nazism or fascism, etc., etc. I think the principle of academic freedom is somehow limited by way of that principle we call academic citizenship. So if we want to create excellent academic citizens upon graduations, we shouldn't be cultivating an ethos that would go to such theories. In this respect, I would think that we shouldn't go that far. We should create citizens of fine ethos, academic citizens of fine ethos, based, of course, on the idea of academic freedom, but we shouldn't go as far as teaching our students extremist ideas in the learning environment. So, to conclude, academic freedom is a leading principle, but it's not an absolute principle.
I agree. Okay, more questions? I'll just put in another question there.
You're welcome.
I'll put it on chat. Oops, sorry. There's the same one.
That's right. Let us now go to what I consider the key danger, the main danger in the modern academic environment. We are all aware that there is a degree of McDonaldization in many academic institutions around the world. So you mentioned here that was it simpler to use the principles of critical social constructivism based on dialogue, the co-creation of knowledge through collaborative work, the sharing, rather than create a trendy pedagogical model? And is a new model needed? Just a food for thought. I'll be honest with you about this, Joseph. I think the main thing here is to go for the right diagnosis. And the right diagnosis here would be one that would tell us that there are things that happen in academia, in modern academia, that shouldn't be happening, clearly. Many of the things we do tend to be measured to such a great extent that we are missing the main point of pedagogy, to enable our learners. So we have reduced many of our pedagogic operations down to metrics, which I believe is not the right way of proceeding with academic learning. So should we go as far as critical social constructivism? Why not? If critical social constructivism is the way out of the McDonaldization of academia, why not? This is a model that I would be very willing to consider. I cannot give you an answer now. I cannot say yes or no in a conference presentation, but this is definitely a model that I would be very interested to consider, especially if this is a sort of antidote to what happens these days in academia, to the commercialization of academia. So why not?
Thank you, Antonios. Shall we have another question? Okay, I think thank you, Antonios. Thank you for your presentation. As I said, you gave us a lot of food for thought, and this is good for creating discussion.